Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Dean, CEO of Kunta Content. I've been working in games, tech, creative industry for a bit too long. I don't recommend it. Please don't do it. And hopefully from my journey and from my lessons and from just learning and researching about the industry across the continent, it'll give you guys maybe a few more insights into what works, what doesn't. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. So it's been fun coming to Cape Town the past few years, meeting all of you. I can see most of you, kinda. Yeah, and this should be a fun, maybe 10, 15 minutes. Cool, so yes. Okay, cool. So that's our game. It's called HIRU. You'll probably see it in one of the stands. We've been building it for a couple of years, and I think for me, it's a unique culmination of all the work I've done in music and film and just storytelling in general. As I mentioned, I'm the CEO of Kunta Content. I lead a really cool team of 5 guys and girls, and we are hopefully making Africa's most ambitious PC console action adventure game. So essentially inspired by Last of Us, Uncharted, and so on. So we're here to dive a bit deeper into lessons for music and movies. And this is a really interesting topic for me personally, because I started out in music. So I was making movies back in 2011, 2012, 2013. And back then, there was really no African content really on Netflix, on any of the top streaming platforms. And it's been interesting to observe that journey over the next 10, 15 years, where right now I have like 5 friends who all have a show on Netflix, right? Who all have a movie on streaming services. And it's been interesting to follow that journey. And conversely, and maybe similarly, it's been a similar journey to get African music on global platforms. So I've worked with a few local acts who became really, really big, moving from a few tens of thousands of fans to millions of fans across East Africa, and seeing that journey evolve over a 5-year period, right? A lot of it sounds really, really good, but as you can imagine, a lot of the steps were super, super rough. And it was interesting to go back as I worked on this to think deeply about what worked and what doesn't. And of course, I'll try to give some context as to why I think, one, Africa matters, what the numbers show, and what lessons we can pull as game developers. So, as I mentioned, I lead a team at Kunta Content. We make great African games. In total, we've worked for over 38 years as a team. Well, not together, but like you get what I mean anyway. Yeah, over 35 different prototypes. We've worked on many different projects with a ton of different funding for many great companies all over the world. And for Kunta Content, we have a couple of really cool partners, some of whom have given us money, which is super important. There are a lot of partners on decks who haven't done anything. But we have tried to make sure that the partners on board are committed to the journey, whatever that may mean. Yeah, so we'll be talking primarily about Afrobeats, Amapiano, Bongo, and Nollywood. I really, really looked for a encompassing title for like the South African film industry. I couldn't find it. So maybe after this, you guys will give me a few tips. Yeah, so they're not just global, but they reshaped the world. And we'll explore this in really small but unique ways. So I like this chart because it's a bit obvious, but it's a bit difficult at the same time to understand how exponential African creativity essentially grew, right? Most creative industries around the world have been fairly mature And it's really interesting to find corners of the world where this is possible. We've seen it in Asia, specifically South Korea, especially we've seen it in India, and we are seeing it more and more in Africa, right? Specifically in music streaming and film distribution, we've had moving from a few thousand people in each country watching and consuming African content to millions, right, in a really short amount of time, most of them less than 20 years. So let's start with Afrobeats. Right now, Afrobeats is 77% share of the global music streaming market, which just by that alone is insane, right? One genre, primarily based in Africa, 7% of global music streaming, right? And not just global as in rest of the world, global as in worldwide, as in everyone, right? And really interestingly, the top genre is pop, right, with 30 billion streams. Afrobeats has 13 billion. And you could argue that Afrobeats is a primarily West African genre, right? So the rest of Africa still listens, but not as much as West Africa, and it's still one of the top genres. So the journey is super clear. Over 5 years, it more than 7x'd in streams, right? Moving from 2 billion to 13 billion in a really tiny amount of time. Now, I see a few people here who run businesses. That's the type of growth you wish for, right? You dream for, you're like, oh, if I could grow 7x in 5 years, this would be awesome, right? I can retire my mom, right? And what's even more interesting is you could argue that the industry, especially in West Africa, is still quite young, right? There are still less than 100 top stars, right? And my qualification, especially for top stars, is people who make at least $1,000 a month from their work, right? That's a bare minimum, right? Super early stages for Afrobeats. And I found this chart really interesting. So both these are from Spotify, so you don't have to ask me later, so where do you get your data? Yeah, this is directly from Spotify, right? Yeah, I found it really interesting that 74% of listeners connect with how African, quote unquote, Afrobeats is. I'm sorry, I'm blocking the guys in the middle. I don't know how. I'm fine. Yeah, this should be good. Yeah, so over 74% of listeners connect with how African it sounds, right? And you would assume that that means it's only Africans listening, but we all know that Afrobeats is a global platform. And if you didn't, the top regions that listen to Afrobeats, of the top 5, 3 are outside Africa. Now, the second argument you could make there is that it's primarily African audiences in the diaspora, but you're seeing a big movement towards the West listening and looking for unique content and unique stories and unique music, which is why the 39% is super interesting, because that's just vibes. Like Spotify did a survey and asked, do you listen to this music because of vibes? And people said yes. Right? So people really connect to the sound. They really connect to the vibes. And I think that's super interesting because it's much harder to extrapolate. It's much harder to communicate financially, right? That people will buy my game because of vibes, right? But when Spotify says it, we can also say it. Yeah, and what that does, I think, for game developers is that you are able to use a reference point and say we've seen really unique, insane growth in genres, categories, music that is connected to Africa in some shape or form, right? And again, public company, like very verified in what they do, yada, right? That's really important because even I, as a game developer, one of the unique struggles is how do you accurately communicate the financial opportunity, right? How do you say, I believe people will play this game and this is what that is based on. It's not just me saying it, it's these 4, 5, 6 different platforms, people, agencies, advisory firms, accounting firms, and so on. Cool, Amapiano. Amapiano somehow seems to have crazier growth. So 5,600% in, again, 6, 7 years? Insane growth. And there were periods, like as you can see, between 2020 and 2021, where within 1 year, the streams especially are tripling, right? In just 1 year, 3x in just 1 year. We thought Afrobeats was insane, 7 times in 5 years. This is 3 times in 1 year, right? And that paints a really, really unique opportunity into what it means to create content when the current audience seems to be tiny, but could become really, really huge in a really short amount of time. Yeah, and to really take my point home, in 2020, it was 100 million streams. 2023, 1.4 billion. Right, so that's 14x in basically 3 years. Insane numbers. If you do this in an accounting firm and you say something will grow like this, they will say you smoked something that morning. Like, those are not natural numbers, right? But again, it really speaks to when a market's time is there, when it's mature, when it's ready, the growth is exponential. And of course, the people who win tend to be the early guys, the guys who built it before it made sense, the guys who saw 10 million streams, Amapiano music, and they still made their songs, right? They didn't look at the spreadsheet and say, this doesn't make any sense, we won't do this, we'll wait, right? The guys who normally win, who tend to win, are the guys who come first. So, Nollywood. Nollywood is a weird one. Depending on who you ask, Nollywood makes the most movies in the world. Depending on who you ask, right? Closely followed by Bollywood. Now, what I find most interesting about this chart, and I know you guys didn't come to a game conference to look at charts, but I hope these are at least kind of cool, like they're kind of interesting. Like, you'll go home and say, so cool chart today. Yeah, so what's super interesting for me is revenues. So of course, Hollywood makes all the money, or most of the money, right? Nigeria makes about $590 million in revenue. If you look at average film budget, there's an insane difference. The average film budget in Nollywood is $40,000 for a full movie. And I've seen those sets. Like, it's one big mansion, they shoot a full 1 hour movie in like a week. It's not Oscar winning, but it's not shit. It's somewhere in the middle. Right? And when you make something for $40,000, making $80,000 is a great time. But if you make something for example, India, $1.5 million, making $80,000 is a terrible loss. The mafia might come for you. If you know, you know. If you know India, anyway. Of course, we know Hollywood numbers, right? The numbers are screamed at us, I think, just before every movie is released. This movie was made for $100 million, go watch it, right? This is the most expensive movie ever made, $350 million, go watch it, right? So if you don't make billions of dollars on that, yeah, well, there really isn't Hollywood mafia, but depending on who you ask. Anyway, so I think this presents a unique opportunity where if you can make a game for a really, really low cost, and fairly good quality, you really stand a chance to win in Africa. And I know I'm specifically in South Africa, which has a unique relationship with the West, especially with a desire to meet that quality, right? However, there's a balancing act that one has to do connected to revenue. So yes, you might make your game for $500,000, $1 million. Can you make it for 100,000? Can you make it for 50,000? Right? And I think some of the more interesting South African studios make games really quickly and really well. Make them really replayable and get you to play it many different times. And that's the unique journey, I think, for more and more game developers to follow, specifically with lessons from Nollywood. I have not been looking at time at all, but I'll try to rush. So how does this work? So building locally, scaling globally. So there's a big arbitrage that most of these genres use, where you make your song in a tiny studio in South Africa, spend like maybe $500 on production for the song, and scale it and generate tens, if not millions of dollars, right? One, how does this work? You have to own your culture. So you have to show a connection to your culture, right? And specifically, if you don't, then why should someone listen to you and not a pop song, right? Why should someone watch your movie and not Marvel's latest film, right? And specifically, why should someone play your game and not whatever EA released? I swear that doesn't refer anything to Playtopia, I promise. Master your craft locally first, right? So perfecting your sound within tight-knit communities, so really, really tiny communities. Controlling your distribution early. All of these players essentially owned large parts of their distribution. Now, games are a bit complex on the, especially downloading the game part, but everything before that in distribution, we fortunately have a ton of control over. I'd argue even more than film and music. Finally, this is a bit of a hot take at times, but building games that reflect African stories, aesthetics, and gameplay is a real proper advantage, right? And we hope, of course, as a studio, to be able to keep validating this more. I think as our game continues to progress, the seeds keep getting planted in not only investors and publishers, but also in other game developers. So, quickly on Amapiano. Start your immediate community, start with your immediate community, maintain creative ownership, create consistently and prolifically. Telling stories that travel, monetization beyond borders, and finally, build your local foundation. So create games rooted in African culture, balance independence with collaboration, publishers aren't always evil, tell universal stories through African lenses, like we are telling a super universal story through a super African lens, and then finally master digital distribution. That's it. Thank you, guys. Apologies, I had to rush at the end.